I never thought I'd see a fake HOA police shirt pinned to my garage floor by my wife. But when he forced his way into our home demanding we stop my wife's disruptive MMA training, he learned a painful lesson about property rights and physics. The look on his face when my athletic wife took him down? Priceless. But what if our security cameras hadn't caught his illegal entry? Would you know how to protect yourself when an HOA crosses the line? My name is Mike Thompson, 45, software developer working remotely from my home in Pinewood Estates. My wife Jennifer and I moved here 3 years ago after I landed a major contract developing security software for Fortune 500 companies. Our 2-story colonial sits on a quarter-acre lot in what the real estate agent called the most desirable community in the county. We fell in love with the well-maintained streets, the community pool, and the sense of order. The HOA fees seemed reasonable for what we were getting. Jennifer is 42 and has been my rock for 15 years. Before we met, she competed professionally in mixed martial arts with an impressive 12-3 record. These days, she runs a small but successful business training women in self-defense. When we bought this house, the spacious 3-car garage was perfect. We could park both cars and still have room for Jennifer to set up a training area. We invested nearly $10,000 converting one section of the garage into a proper training space with professional mats, a small collection of equipment, and even proper soundproofing. Jennifer is meticulous about safety and noise control. She keeps her client list small, just 6 women she trains individually throughout the week. Most are middle-aged professionals looking to build confidence and learn practical self-defense. For the first 2 years, everything was perfect. We paid our dues on time, kept our lawn pristine, and even won Yard of the Month last summer. Neighbors would stop by to chat when Jennifer was training, curious about her techniques. Several of them eventually became her clients. Then came the HOA board elections last November. That's when Gerald Wilson, 40, a mid-level manager at some corporate office downtown, decided to run for board president on a platform of maintaining community standards and property values. He won by a slim margin, mostly because only 20% of homeowners bothered to vote. Within weeks, the community newsletter changed from friendly reminders about community events to stern warnings about violations. Gerald started conducting what he called compliance walks through the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, documenting every minor infraction. The first time he came to our door, he was all smiles, welcoming us to his community, even though we'd lived there 2 years longer than he had. He seemed particularly interested in Jennifer's training business. "I've heard you're running some kind of fight club out of your garage," he said with a forced laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Jennifer politely explained her small self-defense instruction business, the proper permits she'd obtained, and the soundproofing we'd installed. "Well," he said, glancing at her athletic build with an expression I didn't like, "I'll need to review those permits. The HOA has rules about home businesses, you know." There was something in his tone that day, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a neighborhood nightmare. It took less than a month for the first official violation notice to appear on our door. "Unsightly equipment visible through garage windows" was typed in bold letters across the top. The notice demanded we keep our garage door fully closed at all times and install opaque coverings on the small windows. Jennifer called the HOA office and spoke with the secretary, explaining that the equipment was properly stored and barely visible from the street. The secretary sounded sympathetic but said, "Gerald insists this is a priority issue." We complied, installing blinds on the windows, but that wasn't the end of it. A week later, another notice: unauthorized commercial activity. This one cited an obscure bylaw about businesses operating in residential areas. Jennifer pulled out her folder of permits, including the HOA's own written approval from the previous board, and we sent copies to Gerald. The next day, he showed up at our door unannounced. "Those permits were issued under the previous administration," he said with a smirk. "I'm reviewing all such exceptions." I noticed how his eyes kept drifting to Jennifer, how he stood too close when speaking to her. When she firmly but politely asked him to step back, his face hardened. "Perhaps we could discuss this over dinner sometime," he suggested, completely ignoring my presence. I'm sure we could come to an arrangement about your little gym. Jennifer crossed her arms. I prefer to keep this professional, Mr. Wilson. My permits are in order. His demeanor changed instantly. We'll see about that, he snapped, then turned and stalked away. The next HOA meeting was tense. Gerald had added a new agenda item, review of home business regulations. When he called for discussion, I stood and asked why this was suddenly an issue when multiple home businesses had operated in the neighborhood for years without problems. Property values, Gerald replied smoothly. Some activities are more disruptive than others. Jennifer raised her hand. I'd like to know what specific complaints have been received about my business. Gerald shuffled through some papers. The complaints are confidential, but rest assured, they're significant. An older woman in the back stood up. I live next door to the Thompsons, and I've never heard a thing. Their garage is better soundproofed than my house. Several other neighbors murmured agreement, but Gerald quickly moved to the next agenda item. After the meeting, our neighbor Barbara pulled us aside. Be careful with him, she whispered. Last summer at the pool opening, he kept trying to talk to Jennifer when you were getting drinks. When she politely brushed him off, he looked angry. I've seen that look before on my ex-husband. Just watch yourselves. The next day, we noticed a new security camera installed on the community center, pointed directly at our driveway. Then the noise complaints started. First 1, then 3, then 7, all from anonymous neighbors about excessive noise during Jennifer's training sessions. We invested in a decibel meter and documented the sound levels, which were well below the city's limits. We also installed our own security cameras covering our property. I'm a security software developer. After all, I know how to set up a proper surveillance system. The situation escalated when we discovered someone had left a note on the windshield of one of Jennifer's clients. Your CR will be towed next time. The client, a 50-year-old schoolteacher named Susan, was rattled. Maybe I should find another trainer, she said nervously. That was the moment I realized this had gone beyond petty harassment. Gerald wasn't just being difficult, he was deliberately targeting my wife's livelihood because she had rejected his advances. And I wasn't about to let that stand. We decided to fight back methodically. First, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. She reviewed our documents and confirmed what we already knew. Jennifer's business was completely legal and properly permitted. The HOA can't retroactively withdraw approval without cause, she explained. And the president doesn't like it is not valid cause. Next, we scheduled a city inspector to come evaluate the noise levels and zoning compliance. The inspector arrived during one of Jennifer's training sessions, took measurements, and checked all our permits. You're not only in compliance, he said. You've gone above and beyond what's required. I wish all home businesses were this professional. The inspector wrote an official letter confirming we were in full compliance with all city regulations. Armed with this documentation, we requested an emergency HOA board meeting. Gerald looked stunned when we walked in with the lawyer, the inspector's report, and a petition signed by 27 neighbors supporting Jennifer's business. His face reddened as our lawyer methodically dismantled each complaint. Furthermore, she concluded, targeted harassment of a legally operating business could expose the HOA to significant liability. The other board members, clearly uncomfortable, voted unanimously to affirm Jennifer's business approval. Gerald, outvoted, could barely contain his anger as he muttered, Fine, the business can continue. For now. We thought that was the end of it. We were wrong. Within days, new anonymous complaints appeared, not about noise, but about excessive traffic and safety concerns. Jennifer's clients reported being photographed as they arrived for sessions. One found her car scratched after a training session. The most disturbing development was when Jennifer noticed someone peering through our garage windows during a training session. By the time she went to look, they were gone. But our security camera caught a glimpse of a man in a dark jacket hurrying away. He's escalating, I told Jennifer that night. I'm upgrading our security system tomorrow. I immediately installed additional cameras covering all angles of our property, and set up motion-activated alerts on our phones. As a software developer specializing in security systems, I made sure we had comprehensive coverage with high-definition footage stored securely in the cloud. Little did we know how important that decision would prove to be. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in April. The weather had finally turned warm after a long winter, and Jennifer had the garage door partially open for ventilation during her training session with Susan. The black mats covered most of the concrete floor, creating a professional-looking training space. The punching bag hung in the corner, and various training equipment was neatly organized along one wall. I had stepped out briefly to pick up a specialized keyboard from a colleague across town. Jennifer was demonstrating a defensive technique when our security system sent an alert to my phone. I pulled over and opened the app to see Gerald Wilson walking purposefully toward our house, accompanied by a younger man I recognized as Dave Mercer, who Gerald had recently appointed as compliance officer. What made my blood run cold was what Gerald was wearing. A black polo shirt with HOA Police emblazoned across the back in bold white letters. Dave wore a matching shirt. Both men carried clipboards and had what looked like cameras hanging around their necks. I immediately called Jennifer, but it went to voicemail. She always silences her phone during sessions. I sent a text warning and started driving home, but I was at least 15 minutes away. Meanwhile, according to what Jennifer and Susan told me later, and what our security cameras confirmed, Gerald and Dave marched straight to our garage. Gerald began pounding on the partially open garage door. HOA inspection. Open up immediately, he shouted, his voice echoing through the garage. Jennifer paused the training session, confused by the commotion. Susan, wait here a moment, she said calmly, approaching the garage door. Before she could respond, Gerald ducked under the partially raised door and stepped into our garage uninvited, Dave right behind him. This is an official HOA compliance inspection, Gerald announced, puffing out his chest where a fake badge was pinned to his HOA Police shirt. We've received multiple complaints about unauthorized activities. Jennifer stood her ground. You need to leave. This is private property, and you don't have permission to be here. Gerald looked around the garage, focusing on Susan. Ma'am, are you aware this is an illegal business operation? The HOA is considering legal action against anyone participating in unauthorized activities. Susan looked worried, gathering her things. Gerald's intimidation was working. There's nothing illegal happening here, Jennifer insisted. I have all the proper permits, as you well know from our meeting last month. Gerald stepped closer to Jennifer, invading her personal space. Those permits are under review. Until then, this business is suspended. I'll call the police if you don't leave now, Jennifer warned, stepping back. Dave moved to block her path to the door leading into the house. We have authority to inspect violations under Section 12 of the HOA Covenant, he claimed. Not inside my home without permission, Jennifer countered. Now please leave. Gerald ignored her, walking over to examine the training equipment. He picked up one of Jennifer's training pads. This equipment is non-compliant with HOA aesthetic standards. Put that down and leave, Jennifer said firmly. Instead, Gerald began collecting the equipment. These items will be held at the HOA office pending review. That's when Jennifer stepped forward. You are not taking anything from my home. Put that down now. Gerald turned, his face flushed with anger. This attitude is exactly the problem. People like you think rules don't apply to them. He dropped the equipment and suddenly grabbed Jennifer's arm. This operation is shut down as of now, he declared, his fingers digging into her arm. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds. Jennifer's years of martial arts training kicked in automatically. She executed a perfect wrist control technique, twisting to break Gerald's grip while simultaneously sweeping his leg. Gerald, caught completely by surprise, found himself suddenly airborne before landing hard on his back on the training mat. What the? He gasped. The wind knocked out of him. Dave lunged forward to help his boss, but Jennifer was already in motion. She sidestepped his clumsy charge, used his momentum against him, and applied a controlled arm lock that brought him to his knees beside Gerald. Susan, call the police, Jennifer said calmly, maintaining control of Dave while keeping Gerald pinned with her foot. Tell them 2 men have illegally entered our home and 1 assaulted me. Gerald struggled to get up. You can't do this. We're HOA officials. You're trespassers who forced your way into my home, Jennifer corrected him. And that's a crime, not an HOA violation. The security cameras captured everything. Gerald's aggressive entry, his grabbing Jennifer's arm, and her controlled defensive response. The cameras also caught something else. The look of utter shock and humiliation on Gerald's face as he realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Let me go, you crazy woman, Gerald shouted, struggling against Jennifer's expertly applied control technique. His face was growing redder by the second, equal parts exertion and humiliation. Stop moving or it will hurt more, Jennifer instructed calmly. I'm not trying to injure you, just containing a threat until police arrive. Dave had stopped struggling, wisely realizing his predicament. Gerald, maybe we should just wait for the police, he suggested, wincing as he tried to shift his position. Shut up, Gerald snapped. She assaulted an HOA official. She'll be arrested. Susan had backed against the wall, phone in hand. Police are on their way, she confirmed, her voice shaking. They said to stay on the line. Jennifer nodded. Susan, could you check my phone? My husband should have called or texted. Susan retrieved Jennifer's phone from her gym bag. Several missed calls and a text saying Gerald and Dave coming to house, wearing HOA police shirts. Jennifer maintained her hold on Dave while keeping Gerald controlled with a precise foot placement. Did you hear that, Gerald? My husband saw you coming. He knows exactly what you're wearing and what you're doing. Gerald renewed his struggle. This is assault. I'll sue you for everything you have. The security cameras caught everything, Jennifer replied evenly, including you grabbing me first. That's assault, Gerald. Entering my home without permission is breaking and entering. Impersonating any kind of police is another serious offense. We're not impersonating police, Dave protested. It just says HOA police on the shirts, which implies you have police authority, which you don't, Jennifer explained. Now please stay still. I don't want to have to adjust this hold. For the next few minutes, the garage was filled with an awkward silence, broken only by Gerald's occasional threats and demands for release. Jennifer remained focused, adjusting her position slightly when necessary to maintain control without causing pain. I arrived just as the first police car pulled up. 2 officers approached the garage cautiously, hands near their weapons. In here, officers, I called out, hurrying toward them. My wife is restraining 2 men who broke into our garage and assaulted her. The officers entered the garage and took in the unusual scene. Jennifer calmly controlling 2 men in matching HOA police shirts, while a frightened woman stood nearby. What's going on here? The first officer asked. These men entered our property without permission, Jennifer explained. When I asked them to leave, this one, she indicated Gerald, grabbed my arm. I defended myself using reasonable force and contained them until you arrived. She attacked us, Gerald shouted. We're conducting an official HOA inspection. The second officer looked skeptical. Ma'am, can you release them so we can sort this out? Jennifer nodded. Of course, officer. She carefully released her holds and stepped back. Gerald immediately scrambled to his feet, pointing at Jennifer. Arrest her. She assaulted us while we were performing our duties. And what duties would those be? The first officer asked, eyeing the HOA police shirt with raised eyebrows. We're from the Homeowners Association, Dave explained, rubbing his shoulder. We received complaints about an illegal business. I stepped forward. Officers, we have everything on security video. These men entered our property without permission, harassed my wife and her client, and then Gerald physically grabbed my wife when she asked them to leave. The first officer nodded. Let's see that footage. I pulled up the security app on my phone and played the relevant clip. The officers watched intently as the video clearly showed Gerald and Dave entering without permission, Gerald grabbing Jennifer's arm, and her defensive response. Those shirts are a problem, the second officer commented. Impersonating law enforcement is a serious offense. We're not impersonating anyone, Gerald protested. It's just a title. With a badge? The officer replied, pointing to the emblem on Gerald's chest. That looks like it's designed to resemble a police badge. Gerald's face fell as he realized his predicament. The officers separated everyone to take statements, and I could see Gerald's confidence crumbling as the reality of his situation became clear. The police spent nearly an hour taking statements from everyone involved. Jennifer explained her background in martial arts and how she had used minimal force to control the situation. Susan confirmed Jennifer's account, describing how Gerald and Dave had barged in and begun making threats. Gerald and Dave told a different story, claiming they had announced themselves properly and were conducting a legitimate HOA inspection. Their story fell apart when the officers pointed out several inconsistencies and reminded them that HOA representatives have no legal authority to enter private property without permission. The HOA covenant gives us right of access for inspections, Gerald insisted, pulling out a folder of documents. The senior officer, Officer Reynolds, reviewed the document Gerald provided. This says you may request access with proper notice for exterior inspections of common violations. It says nothing about entering garages or homes without permission. And it certainly doesn't authorize you to put hands on residents, added the second officer, Officer Chun. When Officer Reynolds asked about the HOA police shirts, Gerald claimed they were just official uniforms to identify board members during inspections. Sir, wearing anything that could be mistaken for law enforcement identification is problematic, Officer Reynolds explained. Combined with forcing entry and putting hands on someone, you've created a very serious situation for yourself. As the officers were concluding their investigation, several neighbors had gathered outside, drawn by the police presence. Barbara, our next-door neighbor, approached Officer Chun. I've been watching that man harass this family for weeks, she told the officer, pointing at Gerald. He's been targeting them specifically. Other neighbors began sharing similar observations, describing Gerald's increasingly aggressive inspections and selective enforcement of rules. The officers eventually took Gerald and Dave aside for a private conversation. When they returned, Officer Reynolds addressed Jennifer and me. Based on the evidence and witness statements, we're placing both men under arrest for criminal trespass, he explained. Mr. Wilson is also being charged with simple assault for grabbing your arm. The district attorney will review the case for possible additional charges regarding the police impersonation issue. As the officers handcuffed Gerald and Dave, Gerald's face was a mask of stunned disbelief. This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president. Being an HOA president doesn't put you above the law, sir, Officer Reynolds replied calmly. You can't enter people's homes without permission or put your hands on them. As they led Gerald to the police car, he looked back at us with pure hatred. This isn't over, he hissed. But for many of our neighbors watching from their driveways, it was indeed over. The spell of fear Gerald had cast over the community was broken. As the police cars pulled away, several neighbors approached us, offering support and sharing their own stories of intimidation. I can't believe someone finally stood up to him, said Tom from across the street. The way he's been running things, it's like we're living in a dictatorship. Susan, who had remained to give her statement, looked at Jennifer with newfound respect. That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. You were so calm through all of it. Jennifer smiled modestly. Self-defense isn't just about physical techniques. It's about staying calm under pressure and using only the force necessary to protect yourself. Little did we know, this was just the beginning of the community's awakening. In the days following Gerald's arrest, our community experienced what I can only describe as a collective unburdening. It started with phone calls and emails from neighbors we barely knew, sharing their own experiences with Gerald's intimidation tactics. The HOA vice president, Megan Collins, called an emergency meeting of the remaining board members. I had no idea how bad things had gotten, she admitted when I spoke with her before the meeting. Gerald controlled all communications and insisted on handling most compliance issues personally. At the emergency meeting, Megan revealed that she had gained access to Gerald's HOA files and discovered something disturbing: a detailed watch list of homeowners who had opposed him or whom he deemed problematic. Jennifer and I were at the top of that list, with extensive notes about our daily routines, visitors, and supposed violations. But we weren't alone. The list included nearly 20 families, with notes like potential removal candidate and apply maximum pressure. Gerald had apparently been waging a systematic campaign of harassment against anyone he personally disliked. The most shocking revelation came when the HOA secretary, Alice, finally spoke up. "He made me file false complaints," she confessed tearfully. "He would dictate letters from concerned neighbors about violations that didn't exist. When I questioned it, he threatened my job." Another homeowner, Bill Parker, revealed that Gerald had fined him $2,500 for an unapproved fence. When I showed him the approval documentation, he said it had been revoked, and I needed to pay or face legal action. I paid because I couldn't afford a legal battle. The dominoes continued to fall. Security camera footage from multiple houses showed Gerald entering backyards when residents weren't home, peering through windows, and photographing private spaces. One camera had even caught him attempting to open a homeowner's side door. The most disturbing discovery came when Dave Mercer, hoping for leniency, provided access to Gerald's email account. The emails revealed an obsessive fixation on my wife that went beyond HOA business. Gerald had emailed himself dozens of photos of Jennifer taken without her knowledge, entering our home, getting the mail, training in the garage. He told me he needed documentation of the business violation, Dave explained, but he had hundreds of pictures of her that had nothing to do with violations. When police searched Gerald's home computer after obtaining a warrant, they found a document titled Neighborhood Improvement Plan that outlined his strategy for removing undesirable elements from the community. The plan included targeted harassment, selective enforcement of rules, and what he called pressure campaigns to force people to move. Most disturbing to me personally was a folder labeled Jennifer, containing surveillance photos and notes about her daily schedule. In his private documents, Gerald had written extensively about his resentment after Jennifer had politely declined his dinner invitation at the pool opening last year. What we had thought was petty HOA tyranny was actually something far more sinister. An abusive man with power using that power to stalk and harass a woman who had rejected him. When the full extent of Gerald's actions became public, the community's shock quickly turned to anger. Homeowners began comparing notes about the fines they'd paid, the approvals that had been mysteriously lost, and the selective enforcement they'd experienced. The question on everyone's mind was, how had this been allowed to happen? The criminal case against Gerald proceeded swiftly. In addition to the original charges of criminal trespass and assault, the district attorney added charges of stalking, official oppression, and attempted breaking and entering based on evidence from other homeowners. Dave Mercer accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony against Gerald, receiving probation for his role in the scheme. Gerald, however, refused any plea offers, insisting that he was simply enforcing the rules and that his actions were authorized by the HOA covenant. The preliminary hearing was standing room only, filled with homeowners eager to see justice served. The judge seemed particularly troubled by the HOA police shirts and badges. "In my 20 years on the bench," she commented, "I've seen many HOA disputes, but never one where a board member impersonated law enforcement to intimidate residents." Gerald's attorney argued that the shirts were merely identification and not meant to imply actual police authority. The argument fell flat when the prosecutor produced Gerald's credit card statement showing he had ordered the shirts from a website called authorityuniforms.com, along with replica badges and a tactical flashlight. Meanwhile, on the civil front, 17 families, including ours, filed a class action lawsuit against Gerald personally and the HOA for negligent oversight. Our lawyer convinced us to separate our case due to the stalking evidence, which constituted a more serious invasion of privacy. The HOA's insurance company initially tried to defend Gerald, but upon reviewing the evidence, they invoked the policy's intentional acts exclusion and refused to cover his legal costs. This left Gerald personally exposed to significant financial liability. The civil case never made it to trial. After Gerald's criminal conviction on all counts resulted in a 2-year prison sentence, his attorney approached us about a settlement. The final agreement included a substantial monetary payment, a permanent restraining order, and a public apology. The most satisfying moment came during the sentencing hearing, when the judge addressed Gerald directly. "Mr. Wilson, you abused your position of limited authority to harass and intimidate your neighbors. You violated the sanctity of their homes and their sense of security. But perhaps most troubling is your complete inability to recognize that your behavior was wrong. You still maintain that as HOA president, you had the right to enter homes, to touch residents, to stalk and photograph a woman who rejected your advances. This court is sending a clear message today that such behavior is not just inappropriate, it's criminal." As Gerald was led away in handcuffs, many homeowners in the gallery applauded. For our community, it was the end of a nightmare, but also the beginning of important changes in how our HOA would operate moving forward. The weekend after Gerald's sentencing, Pinewood Estates held the highest attendance HOA meeting in its history. With over 90% of homeowners present, the community voted unanimously to remove the remaining board members who had enabled Gerald's behavior. In their place, a new board was elected with a mandate for transparency and accountability. I was surprised and honored when several neighbors nominated me for a position based on how Jennifer and I had stood up to Gerald's abuse. "We need someone who understands the difference between reasonable rules and power trips," said Barbara during her nomination speech. The new board's first action was to create the Homeowner Protection Act, a comprehensive amendment to the HOA covenant that established clear limits on the board's authority. No HOA representative could enter private property without written permission and 24-hour notice. All violation notices required photographic evidence and citation of the specific rule. Violated board members conducting inspections had to wear body cameras. Any fine over $100 required review by an independent committee of non-board homeowners. All financial records would be posted online for full transparency. Jennifer's experience became the catalyst for another important community initiative. She offered a free self-defense workshop for women in the neighborhood, focusing on practical techniques for handling threatening situations. The first session was so popular that she had to schedule 3 additional classes. "It's not just about physical self-defense," she explained during one session. "It's about recognizing when someone is trying to intimidate you and knowing your rights." The story of our confrontation with Gerald spread beyond our community. A local news station ran a feature story titled HOA Overreach: When Community Rules Become Community Tyranny. Jennifer and I were interviewed, and the security footage of Gerald's unlawful entry became a powerful visual symbol of HOA abuse. This led to something unexpected. Homeowners from other communities began reaching out to us for advice on dealing with their own HOA problems. I found myself speaking at community meetings across the city, sharing our experience and the reforms we'd implemented. The most meaningful outcome, however, was the transformation within our own neighborhood. What had once been a collection of houses with residents who barely knew each other became a true community. Neighbors who had previously avoided HOA meetings for fear of being targeted began attending and participating. Block parties and community events that had fallen by the wayside were revived. As one elderly resident put it during a community barbecue, "For years I was afraid to put a garden gnome in my yard because I might get a violation. Now I feel like I can actually live in my own home again." The fear that Gerald had used to control the community was gone, replaced by a sense of shared purpose and mutual respect. I've learned something important through this ordeal. Your rights don't end where your driveway begins. In America, a home is still a castle, HOA or not. While reasonable community standards have their place, they should never override basic property rights or personal dignity. Jennifer has become something of a local hero. Her self-defense studio is now full, with a waiting list of women wanting to learn how to protect themselves. More importantly, she's teaching them that standing up for yourself isn't just physical. It's about knowing your rights and refusing to be intimidated. If there's one thing I want you to take away from our story, it's this. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up to bullies, even when they come bearing clipboards and rulebooks. And if you're ever tempted to create a shirt that says HOA Police, remember the image of Gerald, face down on our garage floor, learning about property rights the hard way.